The dust swirled across the parched Arizona territory, dancing like lost spirits beneath a merciless sun. It was 1876, and while the East Coast celebrated the nation's centennial with grand exhibitions and electric lights, out here the land remained, untamed, a harsh testament to nature's indifference toward human progress. The railroad was coming, they said. Civilization was marching westward. But for now, this rugged landscape belonged to those brave enough, or desperate enough, to stake their claim. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Clara Mitchell never imagined she'd find herself here. 6 months ago, she had been in Millbrook, Massachusetts, surrounded by the comforts of society, pianofortes and poetry readings, cobblestone streets and church socials. Now she watched as the trading post at Cooper's Crossing grew smaller behind their wagon, her husband Edward guiding the horses westward toward their new homestead. The land grant promised 160 acres, a chance to build something of their own, far from the suffocating conventions of their Eastern upbringing. "Just think, Clara," Edward said, his eyes bright with ambition as they had been since the day they met. "By this time next year, we'll have our own ranch, no more answering to your father or mine." His hand reached for hers, warm against the evening chill. "We'll be free." Freedom, Clara was discovering, came at a price. Her hands, once soft and reserved for needlework, were now calloused from camp chores. Her skin had darkened beneath the relentless sun, and her fine dresses remained packed away, impractical relics of another life. Yet something in her was changing, awakening to this vast openness that stretched toward distant mountains like a promise, waiting to be claimed. The Shadow Peak Mountains rose before them, jagged teeth against the deepening blue. "We'll make camp at the base tonight," Edward decided, pointing toward a cluster of cottonwoods. "Tomorrow we'll begin the crossing." His confidence was infectious, and Clara found herself smiling despite her weariness. Whatever waited on the other side, they would face it together. They never heard the riders approach. The first shot cracked, the twilight silence like a whip. Edward jerked forward, confusion crossing his face before pain registered. "Clara," he gasped, reaching for her as more shots erupted around them. She screamed his name as he tumbled from the wagon seat, red blossoming across his chest. Their horses reared in terror, nearly overturning the wagon before Clara could grab the reins. 3 men emerged from the gathering shadows, bandanas pulled up to mask their faces. "Well now, what do we have here?" The tallest one approached, rifle casually propped against his shoulder. "Looks like we got ourselves some greenhorns who took a wrong turn." His companions laughed, circling the wagon like vultures. "Please," Clara begged, kneeling beside Edward's motionless form. "He needs a doctor." "Ain't no doctors out here, ma'am." The leader's eyes were cold beneath the brim of his hat. "But don't you worry. Jackson Reeves takes care of his own. You come along quiet-like and we'll see you're properly accommodated." Clara felt the world narrowing to a single point. Edward's blood on her hands, the leering faces of the bandits, the knowledge that whatever happened next would destroy everything she had left. As Reeves reached for her arm, she acted on pure instinct, grabbing Edward's revolver from his belt and firing wildly. The bandits scattered, cursing as they returned fire. Clara abandoned the wagon and ran blindly into the gathering darkness, the sound of pursuit close behind. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Branches tore at her face and dress as she plunged deeper into unfamiliar territory, away from the road, away from Edward's body, away from everything she knew. The night swallowed her whole. Dawn found Clara huddled beneath an overhang of rock, shivering despite the rising temperature. Her dress was torn, her hair wild, her eyes red from tears that had finally run dry. She had no idea where she was, only that she couldn't return to the wagon. The bandits would be waiting. Edward was gone. The realization hit her anew with each heartbeat. She was utterly alone. When she heard the soft crunch of approaching footsteps, Clara pressed herself deeper into the shadows, Edward's revolver clutched in trembling hands. She counted the remaining bullets. 2. Not enough if the bandits had found her, but perhaps enough for mercy. The figure that appeared was not what she expected. He moved with silent grace, scanning the terrain with the practiced eye of one born to this harsh country. His long black hair was tied back, revealing sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He wore leather leggings and a cotton shirt, a rifle slung across his back, and a knife at his belt. He was Apache, one of the feared warriors Clara had heard terrible stories about back at Cooper's Crossing. Their eyes met, and time seemed suspended between them. Clara raised the revolver with shaking hands. "Don't come any closer," she warned, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. The man studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her amazement, he slowly knelt and placed his rifle on the ground, a gesture that needed no translation. He reached for a water skin at his side and held it out, remaining perfectly still as he waited for her decision. Clara's thirst won over her fear. She lowered the gun and accepted the water, drinking deeply while keeping her eyes fixed on the stranger. When she finished, he spoke, his English accented but clear. "Bandits search for you. 3 men. Bad men." He pointed. "West. They're camped there." Clara's hand tightened around the revolver again. Are you with them?" A flash of something, perhaps offense, crossed his face. "No. Takoda hunts alone." He gestured to the terrain around them. "This land, Apache land. Bandits. Trespass. You trespass." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But bandits kill for pleasure. You run for life." The distinction seemed important to him. Clara nodded slowly, uncertain what this meant for her fate. "My husband," she began, her voice threatening to break again. "They killed my husband." Takoda's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I know. I found wagon." He stood in one fluid motion, retrieving his rifle. "Come, not safe here." Clara hesitated, torn between fear of this unknown man and the certainty of death if the bandits found her. Where would we go? "High country. Bandits not follow there." He looked at her torn dress and impractical shoes, adding, "Long journey, hard journey. You stay here, you die." The stark assessment left no room for debate. Clara rose on aching legs, tucking Edward's revolver into the pocket of her dress. Whatever awaited her in the company of this Apache warrior, it had to be better than the alternative. "I'm Clara," she offered, feeling strangely compelled to establish herself as more than just a frightened survivor. "Takoda," he replied with a slight nod. Then he turned and began walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Clara took one last look at the rocky shelter that had been her refuge, then stepped forward into a world she could never have imagined. The first day's journey nearly broke her. Takoda set a relentless pace, scaling rocky inclines and traversing narrow game trails that hugged precipitous drops. Clara's shoes, designed for eastern parlors, disintegrated within hours. By midday, her feet were raw and bleeding. She said nothing, determined not to show weakness, but Takoda noticed. Without comment, he cut strips from his spare shirt and wrapped her feet, then crafted rough moccasins from a small hide in his pack. "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked as they paused by a small spring to refill their water. Takoda considered the question longer than she expected. "Your enemies, my enemies," he finally said. Then, after another pause, "And winter comes. Woman alone." He shook his head, leaving the obvious conclusion unspoken. As they climbed higher into the shadow peaks, Clara began to understand what he meant. The air grew sharper, the nights colder, Takoda taught her to gather certain plants along the way, to recognize signs of water, to move quietly through the underbrush. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were precise and practical. Clara found herself watching him. The way he read the land, the efficiency of his movements, the quiet dignity he maintained despite the hardship of their journey. On the third night, as they huddled near a small fire in the shelter of a rock outcropping, Takoda suddenly tensed. His hand went to his knife as he extinguished the flames with a handful of dirt. "Horses," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Many, coming this way." Clara felt ice spread through her veins. "The bandits?" Takoda shook his head. "Soldiers, army." His expression darkened. For Apache, soldiers sometimes worse than bandits. Clara understood then. She was not the only one at risk. The realization that Takoda had been endangering himself by helping her added a new weight to her conscience. "What do we do?" His answer was immediate. "Hide!" He led her to a narrow crevice between boulders, helping her squeeze into the tight space before joining her. They remained perfectly still as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then voices, white men speaking casually about hunting Apache and teaching them a lesson. Clara felt Takoda's body tense beside her, his breathing controlled, but his rage palpable. The patrol passed without discovering them, but the encounter changed something between Clara and Takoda. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they continued their journey the next day, she found herself asking questions about his people, listening intently to his measured responses. He spoke of the Apache's connection to the land, their traditions, their struggle against encroachment. Clara thought of Edward's land grant, 160 acres that had belonged to someone else first. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted as they paused to rest by a stream. "Back east, they tell us the land is empty, waiting to be claimed." "Not empty," Takoda replied, gazing across the valley below. "Never empty. Your people see land. Think how to own it. My people see land. Think how land owns us." He glanced at her, something like curiosity in his eyes. "You different. You listen." "I have much to learn," Clara acknowledged, surprising herself with how true the words felt. Their first major test came at the Thunderbird River, swollen from early autumn rains. What might have been a simple crossing weeks ago was now a churning barrier between them and the higher ground Takoda sought. They scouted along the bank for miles, looking for a narrower point, but found nothing promising. "We cross here," Takoda finally decided, indicating a slightly wider section where the current seemed less violent. "I go first with rope." He unwound a length of braided horsehair from his pack. "Tie around you. I pull if water too strong." "Duh!" Clara stared at the rushing water, terror rising in her throat. "I can't swim," she confessed, embarrassment coloring her admission. Takoda's expression didn't change. "Trust rope. Trust me." He secured one end around her waist, the other around his own. Then, without further discussion, he waded into the frigid current. Clara watched as he fought against the powerful flow, his body leaning into the force of it, finding footholds where she saw only chaos. When he reached the far bank, he secured his end of the rope to a sturdy tree and gestured for her to follow. The water hit Clara like a physical blow, nearly knocking her off her feet with the first step. She gasped at the cold, fingers white-knuckled on the rope as she inched forward. Halfway across, her foot slipped on a mossy stone, and suddenly she was underwater, tumbling in the current, the world reduced to roaring confusion. Strong hands grabbed her, pulling her upward into blinding daylight. Takoda had leapt back into the river, risking himself to reach her. Together, they battled, the current, Clara clinging to his shoulders as he fought their way to the far bank. When they finally collapsed on solid ground, both gasping for breath, Clara realized how close she had come to death and how unhesitatingly he had acted to save her. "Thank you," she managed between chattering teeth. Dakota merely nodded, already gathering wood for a fire. As they dried their meager possessions, Clara caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Whatever assessment he was making, she hoped she had proven something by not giving up. The higher they climbed into the mountains, the more Clara's strength and confidence grew. Her body, soft from years of genteel living, toughened under the demands of their journey. She learned to move as Dakota did, reading the terrain, conserving energy, finding the path of least resistance. When they encountered a massive mountain lion one misty morning, she didn't panic, but followed Dakota's lead, backing away slowly while maintaining eye contact with the predator. "You learn fast," he commented afterward, approval evident in his voice. "Become like Ghost. Good for staying alive." Clara smiled at the rare compliment. "I had a good teacher." Their growing trust faced its greatest challenge when they encountered Jackson Reeves and his men again. Clara and Dakota had descended into a small valley to replenish their supplies, believing they had left the bandits far behind. Instead, they walked directly into their camp. "Well, look what we have here," Reeves drawled, rising from beside the fire with a cruel smile. "The runaway bride and her savage friend." His hand moved to his holster as his two companions flanked him. "Been looking for you, ma'am. Don't like leaving business unfinished." Time seemed to slow as Clara processed their dire situation. Dakota was reaching for his knife, but 3 guns were already trained on them. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing herself between Dakota and the bandits. "You've already taken everything from me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's nothing left for you here." Reeves laughed, an ugly sound that echoed against the valley walls. "Oh, I think there's still plenty worth taking." His eyes raked over her, then shifted to Dakota. "After we deal with your Apache friend." What happened next unfolded with stunning speed. As Reeves reached for Clara, Dakota moved like lightning, throwing his knife with deadly accuracy into the chest of one bandit while tackling another to the ground. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled Edward's revolver from her dress and fired at Reeves, catching him in the shoulder. He howled in pain and rage, returning fire as Clara dove for cover behind a boulder. The firefight was brief but vicious. When silence finally fell, Clara emerged to find Dakota standing over the bodies of 2 bandits. Reeves was nowhere to be seen. "He escaped," Dakota confirmed, retrieving his knife and wiping it clean. He turned to Clara, his expression grave. "You risked life for me. Why?" Clara holstered the now empty revolver, her hands trembling with fading adrenaline. "You've risked yours for me many times. Are you really surprised I would do the same?" For the first time since they met, Dakota smiled, a brief, genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "Dakota means friend to all in my language," he said quietly. "Not many whites earn this name." "And what am I now?" Clara asked, aware of some subtle shift between them. He studied her for a long moment. "Awinita," he finally said. "In my language, it means fawn, young deer who learns quickly to survive in forest." The name felt like a gift, one Clara accepted with unexpected emotion. What happens now? Reeves is still out there. "Now we go to my people," Dakota decided. "Winter comes soon, not survive alone in mountains." The prospect of entering an Apache village filled Clara with trepidation, but she trusted Dakota. More than that, she realized she had nowhere else to go. Her old life was gone, as surely as if it had never existed. So when Dakota turned toward the distant peaks where his people awaited, Clara followed without hesitation, carrying the new name he had given her like a talisman against whatever lay ahead. The first snow fell as they reached Hidden Valley. White flakes dusted Clara's hair as she gazed down at the scattering of dwellings nestled against the protective embrace of the mountains. Smoke rose from several fires, and children played among the structures despite the cold. It looked nothing like the savage camps described in Eastern newspapers. This was a community, a home. "My people," Takoda said simply, a note of pride in his voice. Then, noticing her nervousness, he added, "No harm will come to you here, Awinita under Takoda's protection." As they descended into the village, curious eyes followed their progress. Children paused in their games to stare, women whispered behind their hands, and warriors assessed Takoda's companion with undisguised suspicion. Clara felt painfully conspicuous in her patchwork clothing, part tattered dress, part items Takoda had fashioned for her during their journey. An elderly woman emerged from the largest dwelling, her face a map of lines that spoke of a lifetime under the desert sun. Her bearing commanded immediate respect. "Nahimana," Takoda explained in a low voice. "Elder wise woman." He stepped forward to greet her, speaking rapidly in Apache. Clara heard her name, both of them, mentioned several times. Nahimana approached Clara with careful deliberation, her dark eyes missing nothing. She spoke directly to Takoda, while continuing to examine the newcomer. "She asks why you are here," Takoda translated. "I told her your story. She wants to know if you seek your own people beyond the mountains." The question caught Clara off guard. Until this moment, she hadn't considered what came after Takoda, after their journey, after everything. The thought of returning to civilization, to Cooper's Crossing, or even back east to Millbrook, filled her with a strange emptiness. "Tell her." Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell her I don't know where I belong anymore." Nahimana's expression softened as Takoda relayed this response. She reached out weathered hands to touch Clara's face, speaking words that needed no translation to convey their compassion. Then she turned to address the gathered village, her voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. "You may stay through winter," Takoda explained when she finished. "Learn our ways. In spring, you choose." "Choose what?" Clara wanted to ask, but already Nahimana was guiding her toward a dwelling, speaking instructions to several women who quickly set about, gathering supplies. Clara glanced back at Takoda, suddenly afraid to be separated from the one person who bridged her worlds. "I will be near," he promised, understanding her unspoken fear. "Rest now. Tomorrow, new life begins." As Clara was led away to be fed, clothed and sheltered by women whose language she didn't speak, she realized the truth of Takoda's words. A new life was indeed beginning, one she could never have imagined when she and Edward set out for the Arizona Territory with dreams of their own ranch. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had come west seeking freedom and a place to belong, only to find both in the most unexpected circumstances. That night, as snow blanketed Hidden Valley in hushed whiteness, Clara slept under Apache firs, surrounded by a people she had been taught to fear. Her last thoughts before drifting into exhausted slumber were of Takoda, his quiet strength, his unwavering honor, and the way he looked at her now, as if seeing something valuable that even she didn't yet recognize in herself. Outside, Takoda stood watch under stars that had guided his people for generations. The white woman, Awinita, slept safely behind him, her future as uncertain as the shifting winds. But one thing he knew with bone-deep certainty: when spring came and she faced her choice between two worlds, his heart would no longer be entirely his own to reclaim. Clara's thirst won over her fear. She lowered the gun and accepted the water, drinking deeply while keeping her eyes fixed on the stranger. When she finished, he spoke, his English accented but clear. Bandits search for you. 3 men. Bad men. He pointed west. Their camp there. Clara's hand tightened around the revolver again. Are you with them? A flash of something, perhaps a fence, crossed his face. No. Takoda hunts alone. He gestured to the terrain around them. This land Apache land. Bandits trespass. You trespass. His eyes narrowed slightly. But bandits kill for pleasure. You run for life. The distinction seemed important to him. Clara nodded slowly, uncertain what this meant for her fate. My husband, she began, her voice threatening to break again. They killed my husband. Takoda's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I know, I found wagon. He stood in one fluid motion, retrieving his rifle. Come, not safe here. Clara hesitated, torn between fear of this unknown man and the certainty of death if the bandits found her. Where would we go? High country? Bandits not follow there. He looked at her torn dress and impractical shoes, adding, long journey, hard journey. You stay here, you die. The stark assessment left no room for debate. Clara rose on aching legs, tucking Edward's revolver into the pocket of her dress. Whatever awaited her in the company of this Apache warrior, it had to be better than the alternative. I'm Clara, she offered, feeling strangely compelled to establish herself as more than just a frightened survivor. Takoda, he replied with a slight nod. Then he turned and began walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Clara took one last look at the rocky shelter that had been her refuge, then stepped forward into a world she could never have imagined. The first day's journey nearly broke her. Takoda set a relentless pace, scaling rocky inclines and traversing narrow game trails that hugged precipitous drops. Clara's shoes, designed for eastern parlors, disintegrated within hours. By midday, her feet were raw and bleeding. She said nothing, determined not to show weakness, but Takoda noticed. Without comment, he cut strips from his spare shirt and wrapped her feet, then crafted rough moccasins from a small hide in his pack. Why are you helping me? Clara asked as they paused by a small spring to refill their water. Takoda considered the question longer than she expected. Your enemies, my enemies, he finally said. Then, after another pause, and winter comes. Woman alone. He shook his head, leaving the obvious conclusion unspoken. As they climbed higher into the shadow peaks, Clara began to understand what he meant. The air grew sharper, the nights colder. Takoda taught her to gather certain plants along the way, to recognize signs of water, to move quietly through the underbrush. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were precise and practical. Clara found herself watching him, the way he read the land, the efficiency of his movements, the quiet dignity he maintained despite the hardship of their journey. On the third night, as they huddled near a small fire in the shelter of a rock outcropping, Takoda suddenly tensed. His hand went to his knife as he extinguished the flames with a handful of dirt. Horses, he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Many, coming this way. Clara felt ice spread through her veins. The bandits, Takoda shook his head, and soldiers, army. His expression darkened. For Apache, soldiers sometimes worse than bandits. Clara understood then. She was not the only one at risk. The realization that Takoda had been endangering himself by helping her added a new weight to her conscience. What do we do? His answer was immediate. Hide. He led her to a narrow crevice between boulders, helping her squeeze into the tight space before joining her. They remained perfectly still as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then voices, white men speaking casually about hunting Apache and teaching them a lesson. Clara felt Takoda's body tense beside her, his breathing controlled, but his rage palpable. The patrol passed without discovering them, but the encounter changed something between Clara and Dakota. As they continued their journey the next day, she found herself asking questions about his people, listening intently to his measured responses. He spoke of the Apache's connection to the land, their traditions, their struggle against encroachment. Clara thought of Edward's land grant, 160 acres that had belonged to someone else first. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted as they paused to rest by a stream. "Back east, they tell us the land is empty, waiting to be claimed." "Not empty," Dakota replied, gazing across the valley below. "Never empty. Your people see land, think how to own it. My people see land, think how land owns us." He glanced at her, something like curiosity in his eyes. "You different. You listen." "I have much to learn," Clara acknowledged, surprising herself with how true the words felt. Their first major test came at the Thunderbird River, swollen from early autumn rains. What might have been a simple crossing weeks ago was now a churning barrier between them and the higher ground Dakota sought. They scouted along the bank for miles, looking for a narrower point, but found nothing promising. "We cross here," Dakota finally decided, indicating a slightly wider section where the current seemed less violent. "I go first with rope." He unwound a length of braided horsehair from his pack. "Tie around you. I pull if water too strong." Clara stared at the rushing water, terror rising in her throat. "I can't swim," she confessed, embarrassment coloring her admission. Dakota's expression didn't change. "Trust rope. Trust me." He secured one end around her waist, the other around his own. Then, without further discussion, he waded into the frigid current. Clara watched as he fought against the powerful flow, his body leaning into the force of it, finding footholds where she saw only chaos. When he reached the far bank, he secured his end of the rope to a sturdy tree and gestured for her to follow. The water hit Clara like a physical blow, nearly knocking her off her feet with the first step. She gasped at the cold, fingers white-knuckled on the rope as she inched forward. Halfway across, her foot slipped on a mossy stone, and suddenly she was underwater, tumbling in the current. The world reduced to roaring confusion. Strong hands grabbed her, pulling her upward into blinding daylight. Dakota had leapt back into the river, risking himself to reach her. Together, they battled. The current, Clara clinging to his shoulders as he fought their way to the far bank. When they finally collapsed on solid ground, both gasping for breath, Clara realized how close she had come to death and how unhesitatingly he had acted to save her. "Thank you," she managed between chattering teeth. Dakota merely nodded, already gathering wood for a fire. As they dried their meager possessions, Clara caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Whatever assessment he was making, she hoped she had proven something by not giving up. The higher they climbed into the mountains, the more Clara's strength and confidence grew. Her body, soft from years of genteel living, toughened under the demands of their journey. She learned to move as Dakota did, reading the terrain, conserving energy, finding the path of least resistance. When they encountered a massive mountain lion one misty morning, she didn't panic, but followed Dakota's lead, backing away slowly while maintaining eye contact with the predator. "You learn fast," he commented afterward, approval evident in his voice. "Become like Ghost, good for staying alive." Clara smiled at the rare compliment. "I had a good teacher." Their growing trust faced its greatest challenge when they encountered Jackson Reeves and his men again. Clara and Dakota had descended into a small valley to replenish their supplies, believing they had left the bandits far behind. Instead, they walked directly into their camp. "Well, look what we have here," Reeves drawled, rising from beside the fire with a cruel smile. "The runaway bride and her savage friend." His hand moved to his holster as his two companions flanked him. Been looking for you, ma'am. Don't like leaving business unfinished. Time seemed to slow as Clara processed their dire situation. Takoda was reaching for his knife, but 3 guns were already trained on them. Without thinking, she stepped forward, placing herself between Takoda and the bandits. "You've already taken everything from me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's nothing left for you here." Reeves laughed, an ugly sound that echoed against the valley walls. "Oh, I think there's still plenty worth taking." His eyes raked over her, then shifted to Takoda. "After we deal with your Apache, friend." What happened next unfolded with stunning speed. As Reeves reached for Clara, Takoda moved like lightning, throwing his knife with deadly accuracy into the chest of one bandit while tackling another to the ground. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled Edward's revolver from her dress and fired. At Reeves, catching him in the shoulder, he howled in pain and rage, returning fire as Clara dove for cover behind a boulder. The firefight was brief but vicious. When silence finally fell, Clara emerged to find Takoda standing over the bodies of 2 bandits. Reeves was nowhere to be seen. "He escaped," Takoda confirmed, retrieving his knife and wiping it clean. He turned to Clara, his expression grave. "You risked life for me. Why?" Clara holstered the now empty revolver, her hands trembling with fading adrenaline. "You've risked yours for me many times. Are you really surprised I would do the same?" For the first time since they met, Takoda smiled, a brief, genuine expression that transformed his stern features. "Takoda means friend to all in my language," he said quietly. "Not many whites earn this name." "And what am I now?" Clara asked, aware of some subtle shift between them. He studied her for a long moment. "Awinita," he finally said. "In my language, it means fawn, young deer who learns quickly to survive in forest." The name felt like a gift, one Clara accepted with unexpected emotion. What happens now? Reeves is still out there. "Now we go to my people," Takoda decided. "Winter comes soon, not survive alone in mountains." The prospect of entering an Apache village filled Clara with trepidation, but she trusted Takoda. More than that, she realized she had nowhere else to go. Her old life was gone, as surely as if it had never existed. So when Takoda turned toward the distant peaks where his people awaited, Clara followed without hesitation, carrying the new name he had given her like a talisman against whatever lay ahead. The first snow fell as they reached Hidden Valley. White flakes dusted Clara's hair as she gazed down at the scattering of dwellings nestled against the protective embrace of the mountains. Smoke rose from several fires, and children played among the structures despite the cold. It looked nothing like the savage camps described in Eastern newspapers. This was a community, a home. "My people," Takoda said simply, a note of pride in his voice. Then, noticing her nervousness, he added, "No harm will come to you here, Awinita, under Takoda's protection." As they descended into the village, curious eyes followed their progress. Children paused in their games to stare. Women whispered behind their hands, and warriors assessed Takoda's companion with undisguised suspicion. Clara felt painfully conspicuous in her patchwork clothing, part tattered dress, part items Takoda had fashioned for her during their journey. An elderly woman emerged from the largest dwelling, her face a map of lines that spoke of a lifetime under the desert sun. Her bearing commanded immediate respect. "Nahimana," Takoda explained in a low voice, "elder wise woman." He stepped forward to greet her, speaking rapidly in Apache. Clara heard her name, both of them mentioned several times. Nahimana approached Clara with careful deliberation, her dark eyes missing nothing. She spoke directly to Takoda while continuing to examine the newcomer. "She asks why you are here," Takoda translated. "I told her your story. She wants to know if you seek your own people beyond the mountains." The question caught Clara off guard. Until this moment, she hadn't considered what came after. After Takoda, after their journey, after everything. The thought of returning to civilization, to Cooper's Crossing, or even back east to Millbrook, filled her with a strange emptiness. "Tell her." Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell her I don't know where I belong anymore." Nahimana's expression softened as Takoda relayed this response. She reached out weathered hands to touch Clara's face, speaking words that needed no translation to convey their compassion. Then she turned to address the gathered village, her voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. "You may stay through winter," Takoda explained when she finished. "Learn our ways. In spring you choose." "Choose what?" Clara wanted to ask, but already Nahimana was guiding her toward a dwelling, speaking instructions to several women who quickly set about gathering supplies. Clara glanced back at Takoda, suddenly afraid to be separated from the one person who bridged her worlds. "I will be near," he promised, understanding her unspoken fear. "Rest now. Tomorrow, new life begins." As Clara was led away to be fed, clothed, and sheltered by women whose language she didn't speak, she realized the truth of Takoda's words. A new life was indeed beginning. One she could never have imagined when she and Edward set out for the Arizona territory with dreams of their own ranch. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had come west seeking freedom and a place to belong, only to find both in the most unexpected circumstances. That night, as snow blanketed Hidden Valley in hushed whiteness, Clara slept under Apache firs, surrounded by a people she had been taught to fear. Her last thoughts before drifting into exhausted slumber were of Takoda, his quiet strength, his unwavering honor, and the way he looked at her now, as if seeing something valuable that even she didn't. Yet recognizing herself, outside, Takoda stood watch under stars that had guided his people for generations. The white woman, Awinita, slept safely behind him, her future as uncertain as the shifting winds. But one thing he knew with bone-deep certainty: when spring came, and she faced her choice between two worlds, his heart would no longer be entirely his own to reclaim. Winter settled over Hidden Valley like a protective cloak, sealing the Apache village against the harshest elements while life continued within its embrace. For Clara, each day brought new revelations and challenges. The women of the tribe, initially wary of the white stranger, gradually accepted her presence as she worked alongside them without complaint or hesitation. Language remained a barrier, but hands could demonstrate what words could not: how to scrape hides until they were butter soft, how to weave baskets tight enough to carry water, how to identify medicinal plants even beneath their winter dormancy. Nahimana took particular interest in Clara's education. The elder woman would summon her daily, speaking slowly in Apache while pointing to objects, repeating until Clara could mimic the sounds correctly. Takoda sometimes sat with them during these lessons, his eyes crinkling with restrained amusement at Clara's attempts to form the unfamiliar sounds. "She says your tongue fights the words," he translated one afternoon when Nahimana made a series of exasperated gestures, too stiff, like river that will not bend. Clara sighed in frustration. "Tell her I'm trying." Takoda didn't need to translate. Nahimana patted Clara's hand, her weathered face softening. "Sha'an," she said firmly, tapping Clara's chest. "Heart good. Tongue will follow." The days fell into rhythm. Clara rose before dawn to help prepare the morning meal, spent mornings gathering firewood or tending to the small herd of horses kept in a protected meadow, afternoons learning crafts from the women, and evenings in language lessons. Physical labor that would have horrified her Millbrook acquaintances now felt natural, necessary. Her hands grew calloused but capable, her skin bronzed by firelight and winter sun. Takoda was often absent during daylight hours, hunting with the warriors or scouting the perimeters of their territory. But in the evenings, he would seek Clara out, sometimes merely sitting in companionable silence as she worked on her basketry, other times telling stories of Apache legends that explained the creation of mountains or the behavior of animals. "In your stories, humans seem less important," Clara observed one night as they sat beside the central fire. "They're just one part of a larger world, not masters of it." Takoda nodded, pleased by her insight. "White man's God gives dominion. Apache spirits give responsibility." He gestured to the stars visible through the smoke hole above. "All connected. Harm one thing, harm all things." Clara thought of the territorial officials she'd encountered at Cooper's Crossing, with their talk of clearing the land of its savages, as if people were just another obstacle like rocks or trees to be removed for progress. The memory made her ashamed in a way she couldn't have understood before. "Your people are wiser than mine in many ways," she admitted softly. Takoda's expression grew somber. "Wisdom not enough against rifles and disease." He stared into the flames. "Government men come every season with new papers, new boundaries. Each time Apache land smaller, soon nowhere left to go." It was the first time he had spoken so directly about the precarious future his people faced. Clara felt the weight of his words, understanding that the peaceful existence of Hidden Valley was more fragile than its residents allowed themselves to acknowledge daily. The first real test of Clara's acceptance came during the winter solstice ceremony. The entire tribe gathered for a night of dancing, storytelling, and ritual meant to ensure the sun's return. Clara had been uncertain whether she would be welcome at such a sacred event, but Nahimana herself brought ceremonial clothing for her, a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork and moccasins dyed a deep rust red. "For Awinita," she said, using the Apache name Takoda had given her. It was the first time anyone besides Takoda had called her by that name, and Clara felt tears spring unexpectedly to her eyes. The celebration itself was unlike anything in Clara's experience. Drums pulsed beneath the star-strewn sky, their rhythm seemingly drawn from the earth itself. Dancers moved around the fire, their shadows stretching and contracting as if alive. Clara sat among the women, watching with rapt attention as stories unfolded through movement and song. When it was time for the women's dance, Nahimana pulled her to her feet, guiding her into the circle. Clara's first steps were hesitant, but the women beside her nodded encouragement, and soon she found herself swept up in the ancient patterns, her body responding to the drums as if recognizing a forgotten language. Across the fire, she caught sight of Takoda watching, firelight playing across the sharp planes of his face. Something in his gaze made her heart quicken beyond the exertion of the dance. Later, as the celebration continued into the night, Takoda found her sitting apart from the others, catching her breath beneath a canopy of stars. "You dance well for white woman," he said, the teasing note in his voice unfamiliar but welcome. Clara laughed. "I doubt the ladies of Millbrook would recognize me now." "Would you recognize them?" Takoda asked, his question surprisingly perceptive. Clara considered this. The Clara Mitchell who had set out from Massachusetts seemed a stranger to her now, naive, sheltered, bound by conventions she had never questioned. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Everything feels different now." "Not everything," Takoda said quietly. He reached out, his fingers lightly tracing the necklace she wore, Edward's wedding ring on a leather cord. He had found it among the belongings they'd salvaged from the wagon and given it to her just before they reached Hidden Valley. The gesture surprised her now, as it had then. His understanding that despite everything, some connections should not be severed, "I still miss him," Clara said, her voice barely audible above the distant drums. "But the pain is changing. It's not so sharp anymore." Takoda nodded, his hand dropping away. Grief like river, first rushing, dangerous, then slower, deeper, finally part of landscape. He gazed up at the stars. Never disappears, just finds place. As the weeks passed, Clara became aware of subtle changes in how the tribe regarded her. Children who had once stared now invited her to join their games. Women shared jokes that made them dissolve into laughter, patiently explaining the humor when Clara looked confused. Even some of the warriors, initially the most suspicious, began to acknowledge her with slight nods when their paths crossed. She was not one of them. That distinction remained clear, but she was no longer entirely other. January brought the deepest cold. Snowdrifts rose higher than a man's head in some places, and hunting parties often returned empty-handed. Food. Stores dwindled more quickly than anticipated. Clara noticed the hunters departing earlier each morning, returning later each evening, their faces drawn with concern, even when they succeeded in bringing game back to the village. "Bad winter," Takoda explained when she asked. "Game moves to lower valleys. We cannot follow without risking soldiers." The dilemma was clear. Remain in the relative safety of Hidden Valley with diminishing resources, or descend to better hunting grounds and risk confrontation with the army. Clara thought of the patrol they had hidden from months earlier, of the casual cruelty in the soldiers' voices. The thought of Takoda or any of the others facing such men made her stomach clench with fear. One evening, as a council gathered to discuss their options, Nahimana summoned Clara to her dwelling. The elder woman sat cross-legged beside a small fire, various herbs and roots spread on a cloth before her. She gestured for Clara to join her, then began speaking, her fingers sorting through the plants with practiced precision. "She says you must learn these," Takoda translated from where he stood in the doorway, "for healing, if we must move, if there is trouble." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Clara nodded gravely, focusing intently as Nahimana demonstrated how to prepare each remedy, which plants to crush, which to steep, which to apply directly to wounds. The implications were clear. Nahimana was preparing for possible conflict, and she wanted Clara to be prepared as well. The council's decision came down the next morning. Half the warriors would descend to the lower valleys to hunt, while the others remained to protect the village. Takoda would lead the hunting party. Clara watched as he prepared, checking his rifle, sharpening his knife, packing only the barest essentials. "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 4, maybe 5 days, he replied. "Depend on hunting, on soldiers." Clara nodded, suddenly unable to find words for the concern constricting her chest. Takoda seemed to understand even without them. He reached into his pouch and withdrew something small, pressing it into her palm. A carving of a deer, small enough to conceal in a closed fist, but detailed enough to show the grace of the animal. "Awinita," he said simply, "for safe return." Clara closed her fingers around the carving, its edges smooth against her skin. "Be careful," she whispered. Takoda stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek in a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "Always careful," he assured her, his voice low. Then he was gone, leading his men down the snow-covered path that would take them to the lower hunting grounds. The village felt emptier in the hunter's absence. Clara threw herself into her tasks with renewed dedication, working alongside the remaining women to preserve what little food they had, caring for the children, continuing her lessons with Nahimana. At night, she held the deer carving in her palm, its shape becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat. On the 4th day, a storm descended without warning. Wind howled through the village, driving snow and ice before it with such force that visibility dropped to mere feet. Clara helped the others secure dwellings and gather children inside, her worry for Takoda's party growing with each passing hour. They should have returned by now, or at least sent a runner ahead. The storm would make travel treacherous, perhaps impossible. As darkness fell, bringing no sign of the hunters, Clara found herself unable to remain idle. She approached one of the remaining warriors, a solemn man named Kichi, who had gradually come to accept her presence in the village. "They should be back," she said, gesturing toward the path the hunting party had taken. "With Storm." Kichi nodded, his expression grim. "Bad signs," he agreed in halting English. "No smoke signals, no runners." "We should look for them," Clara insisted. Kichi shook his head. "Too dangerous. Wait for Storm pass." But waiting seemed unbearable. Clara returned to her dwelling, pacing the small space as her mind churned with possibilities. Takoda was experienced, cautious. He wouldn't have risked traveling in such weather unless something had forced his hand. If they had been successful in their hunt, they would have been burdened with game, moving slower. If they had encountered soldiers, the thought she had been avoiding crystallized with terrible clarity. Clara began gathering supplies, extra, of furs, dried meat, bandages, the healing herbs Nahimana had taught her to prepare. If the warriors wouldn't search, she would go herself, at least as far as she could safely travel. She was securing the last of her provisions when the dwelling's entrance flap was thrown open. Nahimana stood there, her face lined with concern that deepened when she saw Clara's preparations. The elder woman began speaking rapidly, gesturing toward the storm outside and then toward Clara with increasing agitation. Though the words were beyond Clara's limited Apache vocabulary, the meaning was clear enough. Nahimana was forbidding her to leave. "I have to," Clara said, knowing Nahimana wouldn't understand the words, but hoping she would comprehend the determination behind them. "Takoda would do the same for me." Nahimana stepped closer, taking Clara's hands in her own. "Takoda, strong," she said in heavily accented English, the first time Clara had heard her attempt the language. "You wait." Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes. What if he's hurt? What if they all are? Nahimana's grip tightened, her dark eyes boring into Clara's with fierce intensity. "Then you die too in storm. Help no one." She pulled Clara toward the fire, pressing her down to sit beside it. "We wait, together." The night passed with agonizing slowness. Clara dozed fitfully beside the fire, Nahimana keeping vigil across from her, occasionally adding herbs to the flames that filled the dwelling with calming scents. Outside, the storm continued its assault, though the wind's fury seemed to diminish as dawn approached. With the first grey light, a shout went up from the perimeter of the village. Clara bolted upright, throwing on her furs and rushing outside before Nahimana could stop her. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine whiteness. On the eastern path, dark figures were emerging through the lingering mist. The hunting party had returned, but something was wrong. They moved too slowly, and their numbers seemed fewer than when they had departed. As they drew closer, Clara could see they were supporting wounded among them. Her eyes scanned desperately for Takoda, her heart in her throat. She found him at the rear of the group, helping another warrior whose leg appeared injured. Takoda himself moved stiffly, and even from a distance, Clara could see a dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. Relief at seeing him alive quickly gave way to concern as she ran toward them, snow crunching beneath her moccasins. "What happened?" she asked, reaching for his injured shoulder. Takoda's eyes met hers, pain evident beneath his stoic expression. "Soldiers," he said simply, "found our camp." The village erupted into activity as the hunters returned. Women rushed to tend the wounded, children were sent to gather extra firewood, and the remaining warriors took up defensive positions around the perimeter. Clara helped Takoda to Nahimana's dwelling, where the elder woman was already preparing her healing supplies. "How bad?" Clara asked, as she helped Takoda remove his bloodied shirt, revealing a deep gash across his shoulder. "Bullet grazed," he explained through gritted teeth. "Two men not so lucky." His expression darkened. "Soldiers drunk. Shoot first, no questions." Nahimana and Clara worked together to clean and dress the wound, applying a poultice of herbs before binding it with strips of clean cloth. Takoda submitted to their ministrations in silence, though Clara could feel the tension in his muscles whenever the pain intensified. "Soldiers follow?" she asked when they had finished, the question that had been weighing on her mind since his return. Takoda shook his head. "Lost them in storm, but they know we here now. Matter of time." The implication hung heavy in the air. Hidden Valley was no longer hidden. The sanctuary that had sheltered them through the winter months was compromised. Clara thought of the children playing in the snow, the elderly gathered around their fires, the life that had continued here undisturbed until now. All of it threatened because American soldiers couldn't allow indigenous people to hunt for food on their ancestral lands. "What will you do?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Council decide tonight," Takoda replied, "but only one choice: move deeper into mountains." Clara nodded, her heart sinking. Moving meant abandoning established shelters in the dead of winter, traveling with wounded through difficult terrain, risking the very young and very old on a perilous journey. And yet staying meant certain confrontation with soldiers who saw the Apache as obstacles rather than people. "I'll help prepare," she said firmly. "Tell me what needs to be done." Takoda reached for her hand, his fingers closing around hers with surprising gentleness given his condition. "You not have to go," he said quietly. "Cooper's Crossing not far. White woman, they not harm you." The suggestion took Clara by surprise. "You think I would leave?" The very idea felt like a physical blow. "After everything, your world's still there," Takoda said, his dark eyes searching hers. "Safe world." Clara shook her head, a sudden fierceness welling up within her. "My world is here now," she said, the truth of it resonating in her chest like a struck bell. "With your people. With you." Something shifted in Takoda's expression, a softening, a surrender to what had been growing between them for months. His hand came up to touch her face, tracing the contours that had grown leaner and stronger during her time with the Apache. "Awinita," he murmured, the name and acknowledgement of her transformation. Clara leaned into his touch, no longer conflicted, about the feelings she had tried to deny out of loyalty to Edward's memory. This was a different life, a different world. And Takoda was not just her rescuer anymore. He had become her teacher, her friend, and something deeper still that had no name in either of their languages. Outside, the council fire was being lit as dusk descended. Decisions would be made that would alter the course of many lives. But in this moment, in the quiet warmth of Nahimana's dwelling, Clara and Takoda found a different kind of sanctuary, one built not of logs and hides, but of trust and understanding that had been forged through shared hardship and mutual respect. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The council's decision came swiftly, necessity outweighing caution. They would break camp at first light, moving deeper into the mountains where the soldiers were less likely to follow. Clara watched the faces around the fire as the decision was announced. Stoic resignation from the warriors, quiet concern from the women, confusion from the younger children who didn't fully understand the danger. These people had become her community, their struggles her own. The thought of Cooper's Crossing that Takoda had suggested felt like a distant dream from another life. Dawn brought organized chaos as the village prepared to move. Everything that couldn't be carried was carefully buried or disguised. They would return for these things when it was safe, though no one spoke aloud of when that might be. Clara worked alongside the women, packing essential supplies, preparing food for the journey, helping to dismantle dwellings that could be reassembled. At their next location, her hands worked automatically while her mind raced with worries. Dakota's injury, though not life-threatening, would slow him. The other wounded warriors faced an even more difficult journey. As the first group prepared to depart, Nahimana approached. Clara, pressing something into her hands, a small medicine pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "For healing," the elder woman explained in her limited English, "you keep." Clara recognized it as one of Nahimana's most treasured possessions, passed down through generations of healers. "I can't accept this," she protested. "It belongs with you." Nahimana shook her head firmly. You healer now too." She tapped Clara's chest. "Apache heart here. Apache knowledge here." She tapped Clara's head. "No matter what come." The gift felt like both blessing and burden, an acknowledgement of Clara's place among them, but also a reminder of the responsibility that came with it. She secured the medicine pouch at her waist, accepting both with quiet gratitude. The village moved in 4 groups to minimize tracks and visibility. The strongest warriors took the lead and rear positions, with families, elderly and wounded. Protected in the middle groups, Clara traveled with Nahimana and several other women, helping to manage the children and carry supplies. Dakota led the rear guard, his wounded shoulder bound tightly beneath his buckskin shirt. He had insisted he was strong enough for the task, despite Clara's protests. The journey proved more arduous than even the most experienced among them had anticipated. The recent storm had transformed familiar trails into treacherous passages, with snow concealing dangerous drops and unstable ground. Progress was agonizingly slow as they picked their way through mountain passes, barely wide enough for a single person, helping the elderly and children through the most difficult sections. By midday, exhaustion had settled over the group like a physical weight. They paused in a sheltered ravine to rest and eat, the children huddling close to the adults for warmth. Clara moved among them, checking on the wounded, distributing the food they had brought, offering encouragement where she could. When she reached Dakota, she found him standing slightly apart from the others, his gaze fixed on the back trail. "You should rest," she said, offering him dried meat and a water skin. "Your shoulder needs time to heal." Dakota accepted the food but shook his head at her suggestion. No signs of pursuit yet, but they will come. He nodded toward the sky. Weather clears, good tracking conditions. Clara followed his gaze to the patches of blue appearing between scattered clouds. The storm that had hindered their hunters had also provided protection, making it difficult for soldiers to follow. Now that advantage was disappearing. "How much farther to the new location?" she asked. 2 days, maybe 3 at this pace. Dakota's expression betrayed his concern. Too slow. Clara understood the unspoken implications. The wounded were slowing them down. The children and elderly couldn't move any faster. And somewhere behind them, soldiers were likely already on their trail. "We need to consider alternatives," she said quietly, mindful of keeping her voice from carrying to the others. "If we can't outpace them." Dakota nodded, having clearly been considering the same problem. Some speak of splitting up. Young warriors draw soldiers away. Others continue to safe place. A diversion, Clara frowned. That puts those warriors at terrible risk. "All at risk if we stay together," Dakota countered. His hand came up to touch the medicine pouch at her waist, an intimate gesture that sent warmth through her despite the circumstances. "Nahimana gives you great honor. She sees your path." Before Clara could respond, A sharp cry came from one of the forward scouts who had climbed to higher ground. The man gestured urgently back the way they had come. Takoda moved immediately, scaling the rocky slope with Clara close behind. At the top, the scout pointed silently toward the distant valley they had left that morning. Even from this distance, the column of blue-coated soldiers was unmistakable, at least 20 men on horseback, following their trail with methodical precision. They would reach the abandoned village site within hours and continue tracking from there. "How long until they reach us?" Clara asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Before nightfall," Takoda estimated grimly. "Maybe sooner." The next hour passed. Intense consultation among the warriors. Clara wasn't included in these discussions. This was a decision for the Apache to make about their own survival, but she could see the division among them from their gestures and expressions. Some argued passionately for splitting up, others for making a stand in defensible territory, still others for pressing forward together at any cost. When Takoda finally returned to her side, his face was set in lines of determination that told her a decision had been reached. 5 warriors stay behind, he explained. Create false trails, lead soldiers away from main group, maybe set small ambush to slow them further. "And you?" Clara asked, already knowing the answer from his expression. "I lead them," Takoda confirmed. "Know these mountains best." Clara wanted to protest, to insist there must be another way, but she recognized the logic of their plan. Takoda was their most experienced tracker and scout. If anyone could successfully mislead the soldiers, it would be him. Still, the thought of him facing armed cavalrymen with only 4 companions and an injured shoulder filled her with dread. "When do you leave?" she asked, instead controlling her voice with effort. "Now. Rest of tribe continues northeast." He glanced toward where Nahimana sat with the children. "You go with them." Clara nodded, understanding this wasn't a request, but a necessity. The tribe would need every capable adult to help with the journey ahead, especially with 5 of their warriors staying behind. "Promise me something," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Promise you'll find us, no matter what happens." Takoda's expression softened as he reached out to touch her face, a rare public display of affection that drew curious glances from those nearby. "I find you," he promised. "Always find you." The farewell was necessarily brief. The main group needed to utilize what daylight remained, and Takoda's diversion team had preparations to make. Clara helped gather the children and elderly, organizing them for the continued journey while trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. She refused to let her last image of Takoda be one clouded by tears or fear. As the main group began, moving again, Clara took her place beside Nahimana, who watched her with knowing eyes. "He returned," the elder woman said with quiet certainty. "Strong spirit, that one." Clara hoped fervently that Nahimana's confidence was justified. The afternoon stretched into early evening as they pushed forward, everyone aware of the danger. Behind them, but trying not to alarm the children, they traveled in near silence, conserving energy for the difficult terrain. Clara found herself listening constantly for sounds of gunfire in the distance, dreading what it might mean, yet needing to know. The sound, when it finally came, was faint but unmistakable. Several shots in quick succession, followed by more sporadic fire. Clara's steps faltered momentarily, her heart seizing in her chest. Nahimana's hand closed around her arm, steadying her. "Keep moving," the elder woman insisted. "Honor his choice." Clara nodded, swallowing the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Takoda had made his decision knowing the risks. The best thing she could do now was ensure the safety of those he had stayed behind to protect. They pressed on until darkness made further travel impossible, establishing a cold camp in a sheltered depression between rocky outcroppings. No fires were lit, no hot food prepared. The children huddled beneath shared blankets, too exhausted to complain about the discomfort. Clara moved among the wounded, changing bandages and applying fresh medicine by the dim light of a quarter moon. Sleep eluded her completely. She sat with her back against stone, watching the stars wheel overhead, her mind filled with images of Takoda facing down blue-coated soldiers. The medicine pouch at her waist seemed to carry a physical weight beyond its size, a reminder of responsibilities and connections she had never anticipated when she first set out from Millbrook with Edward. Morning came with no sign of pursuit, suggesting Takoda's diversion had been at least partially successful. The tribe moved on with renewed urgency, everyone understanding that each mile between them and the soldiers improved their chances. Clara pushed aside her personal fears to focus on immediate needs, helping an elderly man across difficult terrain, carrying a tired child on her back, tending to wounds that threatened to reopen with each jarring step. By midday, they had reached a series of narrow defiles that marked the approach to their new refuge. The lead warriors moved ahead to ensure the path was clear, while the main group rested in the shelter of towering pines. Clara sat with her back against a tree trunk, allowing herself a moment's respite. Her body ached from exertion and worry, for Takoda gnawed at her constantly. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Water. One of the younger women, Kimmy, offered Clara a skin. Though they shared few words in common, Kimmy had been among the first to accept Clara's presence, often sitting with her during evening meals. "Thank you," Clara said, accepting the water gratefully. She took a long drink, then gestured toward Kimmy's infant son, who watched them with solemn eyes from his cradleboard. "He's being very brave." Kimmy nodded, understanding Clara's meaning, if not her exact words. "Brave like his father," she replied in halting English, then pointed toward the back trail. "Like Takoda." Clara realized then that Kimmy's husband must be among those who had stayed behind with Takoda. The shared worry created a bond between them that transcended language. Clara reached out to squeeze the younger woman's hand, a gesture that required no translation. Their moment of connection was interrupted by an urgent call from the forward scouts. Everyone tensed, fearing soldiers had somehow circled ahead of them, but the scouts' expressions held excitement rather than alarm as they reported to the senior warriors. Word spread quickly through the group. The new campsite was just ahead, and better yet, they had encountered another small band of Apache already sheltering there. Renewed energy coursed through the weary travelers as they gathered their belongings and prepared for the final push. The location revealed itself as they rounded a sharp bend in the narrow path, a hidden valley even more secluded than their previous home, with a small lake fed by underground springs, surrounded by dense forest and protected on three sides by steep cliffs. 6 dwellings already stood at the far end, smoke rising from cook fires as their occupants emerged to greet the newcomers. Relief swept through the group as they realized they had reached safety. Children ran ahead, their weariness forgotten, in the excitement of exploration. The wounded were carefully transported to level ground where they could finally rest properly. Clara helped establish a central area for treating injuries, working with Nahimana to organize their limited medical supplies. As dusk approached, there was still no sign of Takoda and the others who had stayed behind. Clara tried to maintain hope, reminding herself that they would take more circuitous routes to avoid leading soldiers to the new location. Still, each hour that passed without their arrival deepened her concern. The reunited Apache bands shared a modest feast that evening, celebrating their successful journey and new alliance. Stories were exchanged around small fires, news shared of other bands and their struggles with the encroaching white settlement. Clara listened, understanding more of the conversation than she would have months earlier, recognizing the resilience that enabled these people to maintain their identity and traditions despite relentless pressure to abandon both. She was helping to settle the children for sleep when a murmur ran through the camp. Rising, she saw several warriors moving quickly toward the valley entrance, weapons ready but not raised. Following their gaze, she spotted shadowy figures approaching slowly from the tree line. Clara's heart leapt to her throat as she recognized Dakota's distinctive silhouette, leading two others, only three returning from the five who had departed. They moved with obvious exhaustion, supporting each other as they approached. Without thinking, Clara ran toward them, heedless of propriety or protocol. Dakota was alive but barely standing, his wounded shoulder now accompanied by a bloody gash across his thigh. His face was drawn with pain and fatigue, yet his eyes brightened at the sight of her. "You kept your promise," Clara said as she reached him, fighting the urge to throw her arms around him in relief. "Always," he replied simply, allowing her to take some of his weight as other warriors came forward to help his companions. They made their way to the healing area Clara had established, where she immediately began tending to his new injuries. As she worked, Dakota described what had happened after they separated, how they had created multiple false trails, led the soldiers in circles, and eventually orchestrated a small ambush that had damaged their pursuers' morale, if not their numbers. "Two brothers not return," he said gravely. "Good warriors, good men." He nodded toward where Kimmy sat with her child, and Clara understood that her husband had been one of those lost. "Soldiers, retreat for now. Regroup. We'll come again someday." But not today," Clara said, finishing the bandage on his thigh. "Today, you're safe." Dakota caught her hand as she worked, his fingers closing around hers. "We safe," he corrected. "Together." The days that followed were focused on establishing their new community. Dwellings were constructed, hunting territories established, lookout points identified. Clara continued her role as Nahimana's assistant, tending to the wounded and teaching what she had learned to several younger women who showed aptitude for healing. The two Apache bands integrated smoothly, strengthened by their shared circumstances and traditions. Spring arrived gradually, the snow retreating up the mountainsides as temperatures warmed. Hidden Lake, as they had come to call their new home, revealed itself as even more abundant than their previous location. Fishing in the lake supplemented their hunting, and early plants provided fresh food after months of preserved supplies. Dakota recovered from his injuries, though the wound in his thigh left him with a slight limp that Clara suspected would never fully disappear. He resumed his leadership role among the warriors, but spent more time in camp than before, often sitting with Clara during her lessons with Nahimana or accompanying her to gather medicinal plants. Their relationship had deepened without formal acknowledgement, recognized by the tribe through small gestures, being served food together at communal meals, receiving joint gifts of appreciation from those Clara had helped heal. Having their dwelling places situated near one another, neither spoke directly of these changes, yet both felt the shift as winter's survival focus gave way to spring's renewal. One evening, as twilight painted the valley in soft lavender hues, Dakota invited Clara to walk with him along the lakeshore. They moved in comfortable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared above the surrounding peaks. "Nahimana tells me you speak Apache well now," Dakota finally said. "Understand most things." Clara smiled. "I still make mistakes, but yes, I can follow conversations better." "Good." Dakota seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, choosing his words with care. "Because important question must be asked, better in Apache language." He stopped walking, turning to face her. The fading light softened his features as he began speaking, in his native tongue, a formal cadence that Clara recognized from significant ceremonies. Though she couldn't translate every word, she understood he was speaking of paths joining, of shared futures, of commitment beyond temporary circumstance. When he finished, Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Are you asking me to stay, to become your wife?" "Asking you to choose," Dakota clarified. "Winter ends. Paths to white settlements open again." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Could arrange safe passage to Cooper's Crossing if you wish. Return to your world." The offer stunned Clara. After all they had been through together, she had assumed her integration into the tribe meant her decision was already made. Yet Dakota was giving her a choice, acknowledging that the woman who had fled into the wilderness months ago might still yearn for the civilized world she had left behind. "Do you want me to go?" she asked, searching his face. Dakota's composure slipped slightly, revealing the vulnerability beneath. "Want you to stay," he admitted quietly. "Want you as wife, as mother to our children, as healer for our people." His hand came up to touch her face, a gesture that had become precious to them both. "But want you to choose freely. No regrets." Clara leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling between them. She thought of Millbrook with its rigid social structures and narrow expectations, of Cooper's Crossing with its uneasy tension between settlers and indigenous people, of the life she might rebuild there, respected perhaps for her survival story, but forever changed by her time with the Apache. Then she thought of Hidden Lake, of Nahimana's wisdom and Kimmy's friendship, of children who now ran to her with their small injuries and triumphs, of Dakota, whose quiet strength had become the foundation upon which she had rebuilt herself after losing everything. The choice, she realized, had been made long ago, not in a single moment, but in hundreds of small decisions. In choosing to follow Dakota into the mountains, in learning Apache ways, in defending the tribe against bandits, in accepting Nahimana's medicine pouch and the responsibility it represented. "My world is here now," Clara said, echoing words she had spoken months earlier, but with deeper conviction. "With you, with our people." The formality of Dakota's demeanor gave way to genuine joy as he drew her close. "Then I have one more question," he said, his voice warm against her ear. "What name do you choose? Clara from White World or Awenita of Apache?" Clara considered this final choice carefully. Clara Mitchell had traveled west, seeking a new beginning, with Edward. That journey had ended in tragedy, but had led her to an entirely different path, one that had tested and transformed her in ways she could never have imagined. "Both are part of me now," she said thoughtfully, "but here with our people I am Awenita." She smiled up at him, the fawn who learned to survive in the forest. Dakota nodded approval, sealing their agreement with a kiss that spoke of promises kept and journeys yet to come. Above them, stars emerged in full brilliance, witnessing a union between worlds that most would have thought impossible, proof that even in the harshest landscapes, unexpected bonds could not only survive, but flourish. As they walked back toward the village, hand in hand, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in a people, in a way of life that honored the land rather than conquered it, in a love born of respect rather than convention. The path ahead would not be easy. The threat of soldiers and settlers would always loom on the horizon. The clash of cultures would continue to shape the territory around them. But whatever challenges awaited, they would face them together, Dakota and Awenita, bound by choice rather than circumstance, their joined paths creating a new trail where none had existed before. The wedding ceremony reflected the merging of two lives, two cultures, just as spring merged with summer across the Hidden Lake Valley. Clara, now known primarily as Awenita among the tribe, prepared according to Apache tradition, her hair washed with yucca root by Nahimana and the other women, her body adorned with ceremonial paint and beadwork that told the story of her journey, from outsider to tribe member. The deerskin dress they had crafted for her incorporated both Apache designs and small elements that honored her eastern roots. A row of tiny blue beads that recalled her mother's favorite necklace, a pattern reminiscent of Massachusetts quilting along one sleeve. Takoda awaited her in the ceremonial circle, his bearing proud yet humble before the gathered community. As Awenita approached, their eyes met across the distance, and she felt the rightness of her decision anew. This was where she belonged. Not because fate had stranded her here, but because she had found something true and essential among these people that the civilized world had never offered her. The ceremony itself blended elements from both worlds. Nahimana led the traditional Apache rituals, prayers to the four directions, the sharing of sacred water, the binding of hands with a woven cloth that symbolized their intertwined futures. But Awenita had also requested a moment for the exchange of personal promises, something from her own cultural background that felt important to preserve. "I give you my loyalty, my strength, and my heart," she said in carefully practiced Apache, then switched to English for words she wanted to be absolutely precise. "I choose this path fully aware of its challenges. Wherever this journey leads, I walk beside you, not behind, not ahead, but together." Takoda responded first in Apache, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, then offered his own English words, a gift he had clearly prepared with care. "Two rivers join, become one river, stronger together. I see you. I honor you. I choose you as my companion through all seasons." When Nahimana proclaimed their union complete, the tribe erupted in celebration, drums pounding, voices raised in traditional songs, children dancing around the central fire. Food was shared, stories were told, and gifts were presented to the couple. Even those who had initially been most suspicious of the white woman in their midst now offered sincere blessings, acknowledging that she had proven herself worthy of their acceptance. As the celebration continued into the night, Awenita found moments to observe the community that had become her own. Kimi danced with her young son, her grief for her lost husband slowly healing through the support of the tribe. The wounded warriors Awenita had tended through the winter now moved with renewed strength, their bodies scarred but resilient. Children who had once stared at her in silent confusion now tugged at her hands, eager to include her in their games. "Happy?" Takoda asked, appearing at her side with an offering of sweet pine nut cakes. Awenita accepted the delicacy with a smile. "Yes," she said simply, "though I wish." She didn't need to complete the thought. They both carried awareness of absent loved ones, Takoda's parents, lost to smallpox years earlier, warriors who had fallen protecting the tribe. And for Awenita, both Edward and the family she had left behind in Millbrook, who likely believed her long dead. "They are here," Takoda said, gesturing toward the stars emerging above them. "All who came before, all who shaped our paths." Awenita nodded, finding comfort in the Apache perspective that viewed past, present, and future as an unbroken circle, rather than a linear progression. In this understanding, nothing was truly lost. All experiences and connections remained part of the greater whole. Their wedding night was spent in a specially prepared dwelling slightly removed from the main village, offering privacy while maintaining connection to the community. Awenita entered first, according to custom, finding the interior softly lit by a small fire, fragrant with pine boughs and sage. When Takoda joined her, they came together with the wonder of newfound intimacy and the depth of a bond forged through shared survival. Later, as they lay entwined beneath soft furs, Takoda traced the contours of her face in the firelight. "I knew," he said softly, That first day, when you took water from my hand but kept gun ready, strong woman, smart woman. Awanita laughed quietly. I was terrified and desperate. Yes, he agreed, but not broken. Some people's spirit breaks when world changes too fast, not you. She considered this assessment, recognizing its truth. The same could be said of your people. Despite everything taken from you, your spirit remains unbroken. Takoda's expression grew somber. Different challenge now, fighting not just for land, for life, fighting for who we are, what we believe. His hand found hers in the darkness. Children we have someday, what world for them? The question hung between them, impossible to answer, yet essential to consider. Awanita had seen enough to understand that the Apache way of life was under existential threat, not just from direct violence, but from the relentless pressure of a nation convinced of its manifest destiny to spread from coast to coast, regardless of who already occupied the land. We teach them both worlds, she said finally. They will need both to survive. Takoda nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. You teach reading, writing. I teach hunting, tracking, both important. The vision of their future children. Bridging two cultures gave Awanita both hope and apprehension. Such children would face unique challenges, potentially rejected by white society, yet not fully Apache by blood. But they would also carry unique strengths and perspectives that might help navigate the changing landscape of the territory. The seasons turned, bringing new challenges and joys to Hidden Lake. Summer's abundance allowed the tribe to build substantial food stores for the coming winter. Awanita's knowledge of canning and preserving techniques from her eastern upbringing proved valuable, complementing traditional Apache methods of drying and smoking. The blending of approaches yielded better results than either would have alone, a practical demonstration of the philosophy she and Takoda had discussed on their wedding night. Awanita's role as a healer expanded as she gained confidence and knowledge. Under Nahimana's guidance, she learned to combine Western medical concepts she recalled from her father's medical books with Apache herbal traditions. When fever swept through the camp in late summer, this integrated approach saved several lives, including 2 children who might otherwise have been lost. You have healing hands, Nahimana told her afterward, genuine respect in her voice. Good. Mine too. Remember everything I teach. I had a good teacher, Awanita replied. And I still have much to learn. Nahimana shook her head. Soon I teach no more. You teach others. She gestured toward her aging body with a wry smile. Circle turns. The suggestion that she might someday succeed Nahimana as the tribe's primary healer filled Awanita with both pride and trepidation. It was a responsibility she had never sought, but now found herself prepared to accept, another unexpected turn in a journey that had long since departed from any path she could have imagined in her previous life. Autumn brought news that changed everything. A hunting party returned with not only game, but information gathered from a chance encounter with members of a friendly tribe. The territorial governor had authorized new military actions against hostile Indians following incidents near settlements. Troops were being mobilized, and local militias were forming to solve the Indian problem once and for all. The council gathered immediately to discuss this development. Awanita sat among them now, her position as Takoda's wife and a respected healer, granting her a voice in tribal decisions. The debate was heated but focused. Should they remain at Hidden Lake, which had proven secure so far, but might not withstand a determined search? Should they seek to join with larger Apache bands for greater protection? Should they consider the government's offer of reservation land, surrendering freedom for the promise of survival? Reservations are death by another means, one elder argued. They take our weapons, our horses, our ways. Children forget language, forget stories. Body lives, but spirit dies. Fighting means death now, another countered. Look at Cochise, at Geronimo, great warriors, but how many followers lost? How many women, children suffer? Dakota listened to all perspectives before offering his own. Hidden Lake has protected us through 2 winters, he said. Good water, good hunting, difficult for soldiers to find, but not impossible. He looked around the circle, his gaze lingering on the children playing nearby, on the elderly whose wisdom guided them, on Awinita, whose presence represented both challenge and opportunity. Perhaps there is another way. The plan Takoda proposed was bold, requiring cooperation from every member of the tribe. Rather than abandoning Hidden Lake or fortifying it against inevitable discovery, he suggested creating a deliberate deception, maintaining the appearance of a traditional Apache camp while developing hidden shelters, escape routes, and supply. Caches that would allow the community to vanish and regroup if soldiers approached. We become ghosts, he explained. Here, but not here. Seen, but not found. The strategy demanded extensive preparation. Caverns had to be enlarged and secured. Alternative water sources identified, emergency signals established. But it offered the possibility of maintaining their way of life while adapting to the new reality of increased military presence in the territory. As the tribe set to work implementing Takoda's plan, Awinita found herself drawing on unexpected aspects of her Eastern education. Her father's interest in geology had exposed her to concepts of cave formations and underground water systems. Her mother's meticulous household management provided models for organizing emergency supplies. Even the theatrical productions she had attended in Boston offered insights into creating convincing appearances that concealed deeper truths. You see world differently, Takoda observed as they scouted additional cave systems near the lake. Notice things I miss. We make a good team, Awinita replied, appreciating how their different perspectives strengthened their partnership rather than dividing it. By early winter, the tribe's preparations were well advanced. The main village remained visible, but key supplies had been relocated to secure caverns. Multiple escape routes had been established, each family assigned specific responsibilities in case of emergency. Lookouts were positioned at strategic points around the valley, maintaining constant vigilance. The precautions proved prescient sooner than anyone anticipated. On a crisp December morning, a scout returned with urgent news. A large military detachment was advancing through the lower valleys, accompanied by civilian trackers. Their methodical search pattern suggested they had specific intelligence about Apache movements in the region. The tribe's response was immediate and coordinated. Children and elderly were escorted to the primary cavern shelter, while warriors positioned themselves along observation points to track the soldiers' approach. Awinita worked with Nahimana to ensure medical supplies were distributed between multiple locations, preparing for various contingencies. As she worked, Awinita found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The privileged girl from Millbrook would never have imagined herself preparing to hide from American soldiers, her loyalty now firmly with people she had once been taught to fear. Yet there was no conflict in her heart. The Apache had shown her humanity, wisdom, and courage that transcended the prejudices of her upbringing. When the essentials were secured, Awinita joined Takoda at the main observation point overlooking the valley's entrance. Through Takoda's spyglass, she could see the approaching force, at least 30 cavalry soldiers led by a stern-faced officer, accompanied by 3 civilian trackers who scanned the terrain with practiced eyes. They know something, Takoda said grimly. Move with purpose. Awinita studied the group more carefully, her attention drawn to one of the civilians riding alongside the officer. Something about his bearing seemed familiar, though she couldn't place him at this distance. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the spyglass. Takoda handed it over, watching her face as she focused on the approaching party. Awinita adjusted the lens, bringing the leader's features into sharp relief, and felt her blood run cold. "Jackson Reeves," she whispered, the name like ash in her mouth. The bandit who had murdered Edward, who had hunted her through the wilderness, who had later attacked her and Takoda, was now guiding soldiers directly toward their sanctuary. She could see his face clearly now, the same cold eyes, the same cruel mouth, though he wore proper clothes instead of the rough garb of an outlaw. Somehow he had reinvented himself as a respectable scout, using his knowledge of the territory for a new purpose. "You certain?" Takoda asked, his voice tense. Awinita nodded, passing the spyglass back. "I could never forget his face." This changed everything. If Reeves was involved, the military expedition wasn't just a routine patrol, it was specifically targeting their location. Whether Reeves had somehow tracked them or simply convinced the army to search this region based on his knowledge of Apache movements, his presence made the threat immediate and personal. "He wants revenge," Awinita said, remembering how she had shot him during their last encounter. "And now he has the army to help him get it." Takoda's expression hardened as he assessed the situation. Must implement full evacuation, he decided. No trace left behind. They descended quickly to the main camp, where Takoda called the remaining tribe members together. His instructions were clear and urgent. Everything that couldn't be carried was to be buried or disguised. No fires, no tracks, nothing that would confirm recent habitation. Within the hour, Hidden Lake must appear abandoned for months, not minutes. The tribe worked with practiced efficiency, their previous drills now paying dividends. Dwelling materials were disassembled and concealed in predetermined locations. Fire pits were scattered and covered with fresh pine needles. Even the worn paths around the camp were disguised with branches and stones to make them appear unused. Awinita coordinated the final medical evacuations, ensuring that Nahimana and several mothers with infants reached the main cavern safely. As she prepared to join them, Takoda pulled her aside, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "You must go deeper into mountains," he said, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Beyond caverns, to emergency meeting place we established." Awinita frowned, not understanding. "I'm staying with you. We've prepared for this." Takoda shook his head. "Reeves knows your face. Wants you specifically." His eyes held both determination and fear, not for himself, but for her. "If soldiers capture you, fate worse than death, especially when they learn you live as Apache now." She started to protest, but Takoda continued. "I stay with warriors, create diversion if needed, join you when safe." The logic was sound, yet Awinita felt torn between different loyalties. Her responsibility as a healer, her commitment to stand beside Takoda regardless of danger, and her duty to the tribe that had accepted her as one of their own. "The people need their healer," Takoda said, reading her thoughts. "Need you to lead if—" He stopped, unwilling to voice the possibility that he might not return. Awinita reached up to touch his face, memorizing its contours with her fingertips. "Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. Promise me you'll come back." Instead of answering directly, Takoda removed something from around his neck. A small leather pouch containing sacred items he had carried since his vision quest as a young man. He placed it in her hands, folding her fingers around it. "Keep safe," he said. "Return to me when I find you." The gesture's significance wasn't lost on Awinita. He was entrusting her with his spiritual protection, a connection to his innermost self. It was both a promise and a precaution. Their farewell was brief but intense, conveying in a single embrace what words could not capture. Then Awenita joined the final group, heading to the deeper caverns, forcing herself not to look back as Takoda and the remaining warriors disappeared among the trees to implement the last phase of their plan. The next hours passed in tense anticipation. Within the hidden sanctuary, Awenita focused on keeping the children calm, telling stories that distracted them from the danger while the adults maintained vigilant silence. Through small observation points, scouts reported the soldiers' methodical search of the abandoned village, overturning stones, probing the ground for recently disturbed earth, examining every potential hiding place. Reeves appeared particularly determined, his frustration growing visibly as initial searches revealed nothing. He argued with the commanding officer, gesturing emphatically toward the surrounding terrain, clearly insisting that the Apache must be nearby, despite the lack of evidence. As darkness fell, the soldiers established camp near the lake, setting up a perimeter that indicated they intended to continue their search the following day. Takoda and the warriors had withdrawn to higher positions, observing but not engaging, unless absolutely necessary. 3 tense days followed. The soldiers combed the valley systematically, venturing closer to the hidden caverns with each expanding search. Inside, the tribe maintained disciplined silence, even the youngest children understanding the gravity of their situation. Awenita moved between different chambers, tending to medical needs, providing reassurance, and helping distribute the limited supplies they had managed to bring. On the 4th morning, a scout reported a new development. The soldiers appeared to be preparing to depart, packing equipment and breaking down their camp. Cautious optimism spread through the hidden community, though Awenita warned against premature celebration. Her caution proved warranted. As the main force began to withdraw, Reeves and a smaller detachment separated from the group, continuing their search with renewed determination. The bandit-turned-scout had convinced the officer to leave him with a dozen men for one final investigation of the northern slopes, precisely where the primary cavern entrances were concealed. Watching through a narrow observation slit, Awenita felt cold dread as Reeves led his men directly toward one of the disguised entrances. Whether through luck or genuine tracking skill, he had found signs that others had missed. The Apache warriors positioned nearby faced an impossible choice: reveal themselves by intervening or risk the discovery of the entire community. The decision came from an unexpected quarter. Nahimana approached Awenita, her ancient face set with resolute purpose. "I go out," she said simply. "Draw them away." Awenita stared at the elder in shock. "They'll kill you." Nahimana smiled with surprising serenity. Perhaps, perhaps not. She touched the medicine pouch at Awenita's waist, the one she had gifted her months ago. "You carry knowledge now. My purpose complete." Before Awenita could protest further, Nahimana slipped toward a secondary exit, moving with surprising agility for her age. By the time Awenita rallied others to stop her, the elder woman had already emerged onto a rocky ledge well away from the main cavern entrance. What happened next unfolded like a waking nightmare. Nahimana appeared suddenly on the ridge above, Reeves and his men calling out in Apache and then broken English, drawing their attention deliberately away from their search area. The soldiers reacted with predictable alarm, raising rifles as Reeves shouted commands. Awenita watched in horror, unable to intervene as Nahimana led the soldiers on a calculated chase across the rocky terrain, away from the hidden tribe, toward an area where Takoda and the warriors might have better opportunity to protect her. The elder woman's sacrifice was deliberate and clear, a final act of protection for her people and the future she believed Awenita represented. The next hours passed in agonizing uncertainty. From their concealed positions, the Apache could see portions of the unfolding pursuit, but not its conclusion. Distant gunfire echoed across the valley, followed by silence more terrifying than any sound. Awinita forced herself to remain with the children and elderly, rather than rushing out, honoring Nahimana's sacrifice by fulfilling the responsibility she had been given. As night fell, the scouts reported that most soldiers had withdrawn from the valley entirely. Only then did Takoda return to the cavern entrance, his face etched with exhaustion and sorrow as he shared the news they had feared. Nahimana had been captured. Rather than killing her immediately, the soldiers had taken her with them as they departed, presumably to extract information about the tribe's whereabouts. "She will tell them nothing," one of the elders said with quiet certainty. "Nahimana dies before betraying people." The truth of this statement brought both pride and grief. Awinita felt the weight of Nahimana's medicine pouch at her waist, understanding now that the elder woman had been preparing for this possibility when she passed her knowledge and position to a younger healer. "What do we do now?" someone asked. The question that hung in everyone's mind. Takoda looked to Awinita, their leadership now firmly intertwined in the tribe's eyes. "We honor her sacrifice," he said, "by surviving, by continuing." The tribe emerged cautiously from hiding, returning to a village that felt hollow without Nahimana's presence. That night, they performed a ceremony to honor her courage and wisdom, acknowledging that whether she lived or died in the hands of the soldiers, her spirit remained with her people. As the ceremony concluded, Takoda and Awinita walked together to the edge of the lake, the water's surface reflecting countless stars above. They stood in silence for a time, accepting the reality of their situation and the difficult path ahead. "Hidden Lake no longer safe," Takoda finally said. "Reeves' nose area now will return with more men." Awinita nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "Where will we go?" Takoda gazed northward, toward mountains even more remote than their current sanctuary, higher, further, place where even Reeves cannot follow. The prospect of another relocation, another reinvention of their community, was daunting. Yet Awinita felt a strange calm as she considered the challenges ahead. Each crisis had strengthened both her and the tribe, forcing adaptation without surrender of essential values. "We'll build something new," she said, taking Takoda's hand. "Something stronger." Takoda squeezed her fingers gently. Always stronger together. As they turned back toward the village, Awinita paused, her free hand moving instinctively to her abdomen. She had suspected for several weeks, but had been hesitant to share the news amid the crisis. Now, looking at Takoda's profile against the starlit sky, she knew it was time. "We'll need that strength," she said softly. "All three of us." Takoda's expression shifted from confusion to wonder as her meaning registered. His hand reached out tentatively, resting against her still flat stomach with reverent care. "Child comes?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Awinita nodded, her own eyes bright with mingled joy and apprehension. "A new life, a new beginning." Takoda drew her close, his embrace conveying protection, partnership, and profound love. Whatever dangers lay ahead, Reeves, soldiers, the relentless march of settlement, they would face them with renewed purpose. Their child would embody the bridge between worlds that they had begun to build, carrying forward the best of both heritages into a future neither could fully envision. The path ahead would demand courage, wisdom, and sacrifice, qualities Nahimana had embodied and passed to those who would continue the journey. As Awinita stood in Takoda's embrace, watching moonlight ripple across Hidden Lake for perhaps the final time, she felt the weight of that legacy, not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. The circle was turning, life continued, And somewhere beyond the mountains, a new sanctuary awaited the family they were becoming. Apache and white, ancient and modern, bound together by love that had transcended boundaries most believed uncrossable. As they walked back to join their people, Awinita's mind returned to that first desperate day in the wilderness when a stranger had offered water instead of harm, compassion instead of cruelty. From that singular act of kindness had grown something powerful enough to withstand separation, violence, and prejudice, proof that even in the harshest landscape, unexpected connections could flourish. Whatever trials awaited them beyond the horizon, that truth would remain their guiding star. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.